Hello, everybody. Hope you're having a wonderful Monday. So, today we're talking about verbal and nonverbal components of delivery, bringing content to life. So, this is now the point where we take those beautiful outlines and all the things that we wrote on them that we want to say and we bring it to life. We give it power and emotion and make it into something that could possibly change the world. So, let's get into it. Now, very, very simply, we start with what are the components of delivery? Now, verbal is the first one, nonverbal is the second one. We're talking about nonverbal today because we've already discussed verbal. Now, verbal is just the content, right? The actual words that you want to say. So it's what is being said. Nonverbal are actually split into two categories, vocal and non-vocal, and we're going to discuss that. But ultimately, it is how it is being said. So while verbal is the content or what is being said, nonverbal is how it's being said through our tone, our use of pauses, volume, etc. So all of this, what we're learning today, really is pathos. Now you might have heard of ethos, pathos, and logos, right? This is the emotional appeal. Pathos is how do we elicit a particular emotional response from our audience, right? When we go into a speech, we have a goal. We have a message that we want to send. And often, if not all the time, that message carries with it some particular emotion that we are aiming to get from our audience, right? If I was to do a speech about gun violence, I am going into it thinking that I want them to feel motivated to change something in our policies, in our government, right? So I go into a particular speech thinking these are the certain emotions I want my audience to feel so that when they walk out of the room after my speech, they feel motivated to go do something about it. Does this make sense? So emotional appeals are what you want your audience to feel, and you cause them to feel this. So how do we do this? This is what all of today is going to be about. How do we make our audience feel what we want them to feel? So let's dive into the components of nonverbal delivery. We first have non-vocal. So non-vocal are the things that we see, right? The things that we don't hear them, but we see them. So first is our personal appearance, eye contact, body language, which I've separated into hand gestures and posture, proxemics, which is our use of space, and then facial expressions. And we're going to dive into those in a minute. But those are kind of the big ones. A lot of scholars think that the non-vocal components of delivery are actually more important because we often make a lot of assumptions and a lot of quick judgments about the things that we're seeing before we kind of go into the things that we hear. That's up for debate for a few scholars as well, but I do think that how you present yourself to the world is the first thing that we're seeing. And so we make a lot of snap judgments and a lot of assumptions about that and expectations. So we're going to dive more into, at this moment, the vocal components of delivery. And vocal just means the things that we are hearing, right? The things that you are doing with your mouth in order to allow us to hear what you are saying. So let's kind of go through these: tone, pitch, volume, pausing, rate, enunciation, and pronunciation. We're going to go through them one by one. So let's start with tone or pitch. Now, pitch is the use of the highness or lowness of our voice, right? Making it high-pitched or low-pitched. Inflection is how we add emphasis to certain parts of a word. So instead of saying hello, I could say hello or hello, right? Those three different ways of using inflection change how it feels to the audience. And it changes the emotion that's carried in it. So that's why we have emotion here as well. Both tone and pitch change how we feel about what is being said. If I said, I love you, is that going to be different than me saying, I love you, or I love you? Three totally different interpretations just by me changing the inflection and the highness and lowness of my voice, the pitch. So this is really important when you're doing a speech. When you're doing a speech about something sad, you don't want to be sounding happy. right? If you are doing a speech about gun violence, you don't want it to sound like 1 in 5 students will risk getting shot at school, right? That doesn't match. And it actually kind of makes us a little, I mean, it makes me a little angry because it's not being taken seriously. So the tone would have to match the emotion that you're trying to convey. So in a speech about gun violence, you would maybe lower your volume as well as your tone, lower your pitch, kind of calm the entire vocal range, right? To something that's a little bit more sensitive, a little bit quieter. Because anything that's a little quieter, a little bit more sensitive and low tend to show off the more intense or deep emotions. Whereas things that are a little louder and a little higher and a little faster tend to show something that is more exciting or happy. So really thinking about in your speech, which parts need to be crafted to be more joyful or more sad or more depressing or more anything else. You really have to think about, how do I change my voice to reflect that? Because what we do not want is monotone. That's when your teacher just speaks like this the entire time and there is no inflection and there is no emotion and there is no high or low to the voice. It is just one tone the entire time. And what it does is make us lose our minds. It makes us tune out. We're not listening anymore because what our brains do as humans is it's attracted to the loudest or most interesting thing, or something that has changed suddenly. If something stays the same the entire time, especially if it's longer than 30 seconds, we are out and we're thinking about dinner and we're thinking about, our next vacation. Or at this point in time with the coronavirus, just getting outside for a few minutes. So thinking about these things and making sure we stay away from being monotone is critical in your speeches to get your audience to feel something. Now, volume goes hand in hand with this, right? When we're showcasing a certain emotion with our vocal tone, our volume tends to change with it. So again, the more sad, dreary emotions tend to be a little bit more quiet, right? Nobody really comes, doing a speech about depression saying, and that was the worst time of my life. No, they tend to say, and that was one of the hardest times in my life. It gets a little quieter, right? To showcase that particular emotion. Now we do get louder when we have more excited emotions. So if I was trying to rouse a crowd, to get them excited about something, to make them feel happy and hopeful, I might say, yes, we can. Yes, we can. It's louder, it's a little bit more powerful, right? So it's using volume is so powerful to what emotion you're trying to elicit. But there's also this kind of very base level of volume. You want to be loud enough for your audience to hear, because if we don't hear you, we are not listening anymore, right? We need to be able to hear what you're saying to be interested in it. So one quick way for anybody who really struggles with being loud enough is to look at the person in the very back of the room, right? Now, of course, in this particular semester, you kind of have to imagine somebody at the very corner of the room that you're in. But ultimately, try to speak to the farthest person away from you, because that would allow you to get a little bit louder, using your diaphragm so that your vocals are getting more projected rather than just screaming at your audience, right? So you want to be loud enough to be heard, but you also don't want to scream at your audience. That can come off completely the opposite way of what you're trying to convey. We don't want to be screamed at as an audience, and we tend to think that if you're screaming, that we're being yelled at. So we don't want to miscommunicate our intent there as well. So finding a good balance, speaking to the back of the room using our diaphragm, which is in our gut, not our throat, and choosing when to get a little quieter and when to get a little louder to emphasize certain points is really critical. Ding. All right, that's the next one. So pausing. We tend to fear when we're public speaking any sort of pause or long pause. It terrifies us for some reason, but do not be afraid of the pause. Instead, embrace it. using pausing can be very, very powerful for emphasizing really important points in your speech. Now, if I pause too long, you might be wondering what the heck is going on. So we want to be really, really careful about how we use pausing. However, if I don't use any pauses and I just keep talking and I just keep talking and all you're hearing is a string of 1,000 words and I never really stop to take a breath, I'm communicating that maybe I'm not prepared or I'm nervous, but I'm also not allowing you to take in any of the information. We need moments of pause to remember what was just said. So especially if you have something really important to say, like a statistic, or the main point of your speech, pause afterward. Let us think about it and take it in. And when you're on stage giving a speech, pausing for 2 seconds might feel like 3 minutes, but sit with it for a minute. So if I was to say, let's see, I use this all the time in class, but 1 in 5 women will be sexually assaulted in their lifetime. I let you take in the gravity of that before moving on to the next point, right? I want you to really sit with it and think about it because that is crucial to understanding the rest of my speech. So use pauses very specifically. And one way to remind yourself to use pausing is writing it in your note cards, right? When you get to that point in the speech where you want to pause, either draw a little, shape that would remind you to pause or write out pause to remind yourself. Now, pausing can go with rate as well. Oh, sorry, I never actually clicked that for you. So long or short, use it for emphasis. Now, rate, that's how fast or slow we're speaking. So all of these you're starting to see are interconnected. Rate is how fast you speak or how slow you speak. Obviously, we do not want you to speak very fast because we lose all the things that you're trying to say and then it doesn't really make sense and then we're not really listening anyway. So slow down enough for us to really take in what you're saying so that we hear every word, we get every point, and we have pauses to take it all in. But of course, it's a spectrum. You do not want to go too slow. You might have had a friend or a teacher or a family member that speaks so incredibly slow that you want to finish their sentence for them, right? You do not want to speak so slow that people are trying to finish your sentence because then they're not listening to understand. They are listening to respond or to complete, right? So again, finding a balance is crucial, but also specifically using faster or slower rate in certain parts of the speech convey a particular emotion. Fast speech, like we said earlier, kind of shows a more excited, happier type of emotion. Speaking slower makes the more intense, deep, maybe sorrowful emotions more powerful. So use these very, very specifically, and it'll make your speech that much more powerful. Now, the next one is enunciation. So enunciation is how clearly you say words, right? I am trying to say my words so that everyone can understand what I'm saying. If you are a mumbler, somebody who kind of strings all their words together, it's going to be hard for the audience to stay with you on your topic, and thus really hard to be feeling any sort of emotion about your topic if it's too hard to understand you. This is really crucial, especially for people who speak many different languages, right? If you speak another language, it's really hard to switch in between languages. And so especially if you're in, let's say, an English-speaking country like the United States, primarily an English-speaking country, and you speak another language, if somebody gets up there and is speaking English really, really, really fast and you're not totally there yet, it's going to be really hard for you to understand. And that's a little ethnocentric, right? We're not able to notice that our audience members might come from different places and have different languages. So it's part of being an ethical public speaker to slow down and enunciate your words so that everyone can understand you, at least as far as you can control, right? And this kind of goes along with pronunciation. This is how we correctly say words, right? It's the correct pronunciation. An example of this is when George W. Bush was president, and he was talking about kind of 9/11 and our Iraq war, and he had said nuclear versus the word, which is correctly pronounced, nuclear. And the press had a field day because they could not believe that the president of the United States could not figure out the correct pronunciation of a very important term, right? Because like we talked about in earlier lectures, language is very abstract, it's arbitrary, it's ambiguous, meaning that sometimes we have very slight differences in pronunciation or the same pronunciation and the word changes, right? So we have to be really careful about how we're pronouncing words, because this also has to do with our credibility. If we say a word or a phrase incorrectly, people might not trust that what we have to say after that is going to be correct as well. So we have to show that we are intelligent and practiced enough in our speeches that we know what we're talking about. Awesome. So those are the vocal components of delivery, but now let's go to some of the non-vocal. Ooh, we got a lot of good stuff here. Okay, so let's go back real quick. We're going to talk about personal appearance, eye contact, body language, hand gestures, posture, proxemics, and facial expressions. So we're going to start with personal appearance. So I'm just going to fast forward here, and we're going to look at this picture for a moment. When we're saying personal appearance, we are discussing all the things that people see about us when we come onto the stage, right? They see our hairstyles. They see our makeup or no makeup. They see our glasses, our braces, our jewelry, our, nail color. They see everything. They see our clothing. They see whether we shaved or not, right? They see all of these kind of intricate details about what makes us, at least in terms of the visual. And what this means is that we have to be really specific about how we present ourselves to our audience. Now, this doesn't mean to lose self-expression. As you can see, all of these different people are using their own methods of self or cultural expression, but they still look presentable. They still look presentable and appropriately dressed for what they are trying to do. So what we're trying to get at with public speaking is we want to wear something that absolutely highlights who we are, right? Showcases our personality, what we're here to talk about, right? So it can be related to the topic. You might be wearing something that actually relates to what you're discussing that day, and that's okay, as long as it relates. But we also want to wear something that is non-distracting to the message. The whole point of you being up there giving a speech is that you have a specific thing to say. But if your clothing distracts from the message, then they haven't heard you at all. And then what was the point of being up there in the first place? So you want to wear something that is professional, that is appropriate, non-distracting, but can still highlight who you are and who you're bringing to the table in this moment where you are teaching us something. Now, some of these are more dressed down than others, right? Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, they're very casual. And most of the time, it depends on the context of where you're giving your speech. These are tech people, and in the tech world, we tend to see dressing down as part of the culture. So while in their home bases, dressing like that is appropriate, it depends. If they go out to, a really important media conference where people expect them to dress a little bit more professionally, then this outfit might not work. So it's also contextual. You need to think about, who am I giving a speech to? Where am I giving it? What is the topic? And how do I want to present myself? There are some no-nos, some kind of hard and fast rules for how not to dress. Now, Hoodies are usually not something that you want to wear when you're giving a speech. And I want you to think about why for a second. Hoodies don't seem that bad, right? But what hoodies do is showcase a particular, what's the word? A particular kind of casualness to presenting a speech that showcases that you're not really here seriously, or that you know exactly what you're talking about and that you've prepared for this for a long time. It comes off as I threw on whatever I had and I'm just here to do the thing and get it over with, right? Even if that's not your intent, what we wear communicates something to people. And so whether or not you think it communicates that when you're putting it on, generally the public will have a particular idea of what it is reading to them, right? Now, if he's doing a speech about the Indians, maybe it's more appropriate, but ultimately, you know, the sleeves rolled up, the hoodie, and now the hat make it all look like he's not really prepared or credible to speak about whatever this topic is. Now, if what he's wearing is not related to the topic at all, then it's extremely inappropriate for what he wants to discuss. So as you can see, he's wearing a Make America Great Again hat, but it looks like he's got it covered up on the America part. So maybe this speech is related to something else and he's put another word there. Still, hats or anything that covers your face, like your eyes or your nose, when you look down at your notes, is a no-no. You don't want to, at any point in your speech, block yourself from your audience. Glasses, hijabs, all of those types of things are different, right? Hijabs do not block your face well, some different types of cultural clothing can block your mouth. And cultural attire is a little different, right? I mean, this is a very ingrained personal and cultural norm, right? That's a little different. Now, while hats are popular in the United States, when you are wearing one on stage, also in the United States, we tend to think that that is a little inappropriate because it blocks us from being able to see your face when you're speaking. So what are some of the other things? So again, anything that's culturally insensitive. If you come to talk about racial injustice and you are dressed as a slave or a slave owner, and you are, especially if you're dressed as a slave owner, that would be entirely inappropriate and culturally insensitive, racially insensitive. Right? I've never had that happen, but I have seen other teachers who have had that happen, and it's really not okay. If you're wearing something that's too revealing, right? We're then distracted by what you're wearing and we're not focusing on what you're talking about. Anything that's offensive in any way, obviously we're looking at that and we're feeling angry about that and we're not listening to you anymore. Anything that's graphic or sexual, so anything that's graphic in a sexual or violent manner is really not okay, right? Especially if you're wearing a shirt that says something specific. Again, your goal is not to shock and awe your audience about one particular thing. You're there to send a message very thoroughly and clearly and ethically, right? Part of being a public speaker is being ethical, making sure that you are uniting and speaking, well, I guess ethically again to your audience, instead of offending or pushing them away. So again, anything that covers your face entirely or partially, unless it is a cultural attire. And then anything that looks dirty or unpresentable. So, I mean, this is kind of a very simple, fast rule. Look presentable, right? When you go to a job interview, you pick those clothes very specifically so that the person that's hiring you, or you're hoping will hire you, takes you seriously, can look at you and say, you know, they prepared for this interview, right? They chose clothes that would make them look professional, mature, and ready to take on this job. And that's exactly what public speaking is, right? You are trying to convince people of something. You're trying to make them believe. You're trying to make them hear you. And that takes a little convincing. And part of that convincing process is dressing well enough to say, hey, I know what I'm talking about. You can trust me, right? Okay. Last thing about personal appearance. So according to a 2011 study in the International Journal of Business and Social Science, university professors dressed in formal attire, defined as a business suit, are perceived by students to have more credibility than professors in casual or semi-formal dress. Now that's really important, right? If part of the reason that we're able to change people's minds by public speaking is because we're credible, then we need to take advantage of what it means to be credible. And part of that is how we dress. Now, professors that were dressed in casual or semi-formal dress were perceived as being more caring and more likable than the formally dressed instructors. So now we're getting into this whole world of how you dress also changes how people perceive you in terms of personality and qualities, right? So it's important to consider what you wear when you are giving a speech. And especially in a public speaking class like this, you don't want to wear any of the things that we've just talked about. You want to wear something that is kind of makes us focus on you and your voice, not what you're wearing. Okay, so very quickly moving to eye contact. Now, in some cultures, eye contact is seen as aggressive or disrespectful. We are operating, at least in this course right now, on the United States view of eye contact, which is it is respectful and it's important, right? In this country, we see eye contact as being very personal, very connecting, very empathetic. And as a public speaker, you are there really to serve the audience. You're there to bring something to them, new information, a new ideology, a new way of thinking. And so if you want to be able to get your audience feeling something about your speech, you have to be able to look at them, communicate to them how you're feeling through eye contact. If you don't look at your audience the entire time, then they don't think you're talking to them or that you don't care. So we're tuning out, because if you don't care, why should I, right? One rule of thumb, if you really struggle with eye contact, I know some people say look at a spot in the back of the room, but that defeats the purpose of why you're using eye contact in the first place. You want to see us, and I want to see you. I want to know that you're talking to me, because it makes it feel personal, and now I'm invested. So what I would do is, I call it the sprinkler technique. I find 5 places from left to right in the room that I'm in. I look far left for a few moments, make a few points, then go to the between left and middle, make a few points, then the middle of the room, then the right middle, and then the far right. And so I kind of do that slowly throughout the first half of the speech, and then the second half I make my way back. Now, depending on how long your speech is, you might go back and forth, but try not to go back and forth too quickly. You don't want to look crazy. You just want to look like you are trying to cover everybody who's in the room. Another way to do this is that if you're giving a speech with somebody in the room that you know and trust, starting with them can make you feel confident enough to move on to other people and then come back. All right, now body language. This is one of my favorite parts of public speaking. We tend to feel like we don't have any control of our body when we're on stage, right? Because everything's going on in our heads. We're so focused on, oh, if I'm going to forget something, or will I say the wrong thing, or will I stumble over my words? You know, we tend to get caught up in our heads, but our bodies are there to help us get through this. And we tend to, if we're forgetting about our body does things like shaking our hands, touching our hair, shifting our weight from side to side. All of that is normal nerves, but why not use the body to make your speech more interesting? And we do that in a few ways: hand gestures and posture. Hand gestures are actually using our hands, right? This is a very popular way to use a hand gesture, is the finger point. It's often used when making a very critical, intense, and serious point, right? If you look at the faces of all these people making these points, they look angry, they look upset, they look severe, right? Look at Bill Cosby. He looks very severe and even angry. Trump looks angry and a little excited. Winston Churchill in the bottom right there, he looks concerned, but also powerful, right? Anne Hathaway looks just powerful as hell, right? She looks like she is making the point of her life, and it's stern and it's serious and it's important. So that kind of hand gesture is telling and signaling the audience, this is one of the single most important things I'm going to say, right? When you start pointing at the audience, now that's more of an aggressive thing. If you see Trump, he's actually pointing at the audience rather than up. That is an aggressive technique to say, I'm talking to you directly. Other types of hand gestures, like both hands up in the air. This is used many different ways, right? Hands up in the air can mean very different things. So in this one, we're seeing someone who looks like they're making a lighthearted or more casual point. Using hands up in the air can, in this instance, mean something like, this is all there is, right? The most important things, we're gonna lift them up, and this is what we're talking about. So it could be used for hopeful, positive stuff, putting your hands up and lifting things. It can also be used as a defensive technique, where here he has palms facing out, shoulders raised, and a look on his face that says, I'm feeling defensive, right? So almost like he's pushing the audience away. So again, you can use these types of gestures to communicate very specific emotions. Another Trump gesture, which is using hands kind of very severely structured. If you look at both of his hands, his fingers are glued together in a very flat surface. Now, this is often used for demonstrating certain things. Now, in this particular speech, I'm not sure what he's demonstrating, but it looks like a demonstration for telling us which direction we're going in the nation, or, you know, you could really make up anything for this kind of image. How we see the future and where we want to go. We use these kind of severe hand movements when we're looking toward the future. So again, thinking about how you want to use gestures to enhance certain points in your speech are so, so important. Now I'm going to come back to this one. We have another finger point gesture here. We also have a lot of other body language going on that we're going to come back to. But we again see this finger point gesture. Instead of being up or at the audience, it's down. Now this is one that we use often when we're making a point, when we're especially disgusted or disappointed or need people to hear this particular point. Now this is Greta Thunberg. This is her famous speech when she went to the UN and shamed all of the older people in our governments for not dealing with climate issues, right? For not dealing with global warming when it needed to be dealt with, and leaving the problem to all of the younger generations, right? So she's making a point of how dare you, and you can see this in her body language and in her gesture. And then we have Malala, who has her hand palm relaxed, open and up toward her face, which is often a more calm and serene gesture, right? It's not done in anger, but it's done in a kind of more hopeful, lifting people up, bringing people in type of movement. So I really want you to start thinking about how you are going to incorporate some of these gestures into your speeches, because it makes them so much more powerful. Now let's go back to these pictures and look at body language as well, in terms of posture. So we just looked at hand gestures specifically, right? Hand gestures can also be, I kind of mentioned it in terms of demonstrating something. When you say, I'm looking at a box, you know, you can do the motion of a box. When you're saying one, you can hold up 1, 2, 2, and 3, 3. But other than that, you want to be using gestures just to make these points. But what goes along with those gestures is posture. And that's how, you know, how our shoulders are positioned. It's how our lower back, middle back, and upper back are positioned. It's how our hips are positioned and our legs. It's where our arms kind of sit, other than when they're being used for hand gestures. Now with Malala in this picture, it looks like she's standing pretty casually. You know, she's not rigid. She has kind of a more relaxed tone to her shoulders and her hand. Her face is even slightly relaxed. So we're not seeing that this is an emotion of disgust or anger or hatred. We're seeing hope, comfort, calm, peace, right? Because we see a relaxed posture. Greta, on the other hand, is completely different. Now we see in her neck even these very strained muscles, right? This frowned kind of brow that is very, very intensely bent, right? We see these extreme lines here, the tight top of the mouth, the extreme clenching of this jaw, or not clenching, but tightening of this jaw. And then look at her back. She's leaning forward. Anytime that we lean forward, it's kind of a form of aggression or taking caution, right? Leaning back tends to show that we're more at ease and relaxed. But she's leaning forward. She has a very severe right angle of her hand. Her fingers are curled up and tightened, and her face is tight, right? So this is a very clear body posture that is showcasing what she's feeling, which is anger and disgust. Now, this is Emma Gonzalez, and she was part of the Parkland, Florida school shooting. She watched many of her friends die, and she gave a speech about that moment, trying to get people to take gun violence very seriously and change the policies in our country. And what she did in this speech is she spoke about all the things that she wanted to say, and then she actually opened it by saying 6 minutes and some odd seconds was how long it took to see a lot of my friends die. So at the end of this speech, she had a moment of silence for 6 minutes and something odd seconds for exactly how long it took the shooter to kill everybody in the school. Now, as we can see in her posture, what kind of emotions do you think she's feeling? We see a furrowed brow, right? It's tense here and here. Eyes closed very, very tight, so we see them wrinkle. We have this snarled kind of upper lip that looks like what happens when we cry or we're in pain, but kind of a semi-relaxed bottom jaw, but still is clenched to the top jaw. But then we actually see these relaxed shoulders. So we see a tight, scrunched face, but then relaxed shoulders. So this is actually communicating a few different and maybe opposing emotions. Relaxed shoulders means calm, right? She might be trying to calm herself and stay calm in a moment of extreme anxiety and extreme emotion. So we're having just a complete overwhelming emotion of sadness, anger, hopelessness, loss, grief, right? I mean, she's feeling a whole bunch of things, and we see it in all these different mixed messages of relaxation and then severity, right? Relaxed forehead, but severe brows. So why we're digging into this is because your audience reads these things as well. This is part of how we actually tell if the person speaking to us is genuine or not, is how much are you feeling? Because that's gonna come off onto us and make us feel the same thing. We don't really need to go too much into these, but look at the body posture, right? These really high and tight shoulders, the wrinkled brow, the wrinkled forehead, the kind of eyes wide open, the hands at a pretty severe angle, all hands and fingers outstretched, not curled. This is not a relaxed pose, right? This is an anxious, maybe a little angry and surprised type of posture. This one's a little bit more relaxed, right? I mean, there's a little bit more relaxation here. It's not a complete 90-degree angle. Now, the last thing that we were going to talk about, one of the last things is facial expressions. And since we're going to get to that at the bottom, I'll just kind of go through it as we go through the pictures again. Facial expressions tell all. They tell us what we need to feel before you tell us what you need us to feel. Because before you say a line that's, let's say, depressing, your face shows it first. So how you show your emotion will tell us how we need to feel about your speech. Look at these faces. Look at all the things they're expressing. Anger, stern confidence, anger and a little bit of joy, anger, but also power and hope, right? This is more relaxed. This is more defensive, shock, surprise. This one is more of a blank kind of stare, something that we might do when we're thinking about what we're going to say next, right? This is pain, but hope for the future, anger, disgust, hope, peace, calm, right? So facial expressions are both subtle and big. You want to be able to hone in your ability to showcase these facial expressions in really important ways in your speeches. Because if you don't show emotion, we will not feel it. All right. Proxemics, last thing. So proxemics, that's the use of space in public speaking, right? It's how close we are to our audience or how far away. It's if we use the space that we're given to kind of walk around the room or stay put. If you're really nervous and your body kind of does things, you know, like shake, your hands shake, or you shift your weight back and forth, one way to help this is using the space. Now, you don't want to ping pong back and forth or not look at us and turn your body away from us. You always want to face the audience, but you can kind of go in a triangle. So if you are the point of the triangle, then you can go off to the left, right? So if this is you, you can go off to the left and talk to your audience over here. Then make your way to the middle, talk to the audience here. And then make your way to the right and talk to them over here. But it's got to be a slow progression from one point to the next. And you always want to be facing your audience. All right, now, all of that was pathos, right? Again, all of those things, the components of delivery, are trying to elicit a response, an emotional response from our audience. So how do we actually do that? How do we elicit or accomplish pathos? How do we make our tone, facial expressions, gestures, postures, pausing, work to express a certain emotion we want the audience to feel while they're listening to us? And I'm going to show you a few examples of these things, and we're going to work through them. Now, obviously, if we go back to this question, we've already kind of answered it, right? By going through what our tone does, what our facial expressions do, how to use gestures and posture. We talked about how to use those to make a certain emotion that we want our audience to feel. So you already kind of have this answer, but let's look at some examples. So this is JFK and Nixon in the first televised debate in the United States. It was in 1960, and they did a debate for the very first time on national television. Before that, debates were only heard on the radio. Now, what's interesting about this debate is that it helped us identify in public speaking how much people respond to the visual, right? Seeing somebody speak and hearing them versus just hearing their voice. So we have these two components, and they work with one another or they work against one another. So what happened in this speech is that people who watched the TV, watched the debate, thought that JFK won because he looked confident, right? In this chair, he's sitting at ease. He's got his hands kind of plainly folded over his knee. He has his knees crossed. His shoulders are relaxed. His face is just kind of set in a neutral tone. He looks comfortable and confident. Now, if we look at JFK, it looks like he might have been shaking his leg. He has a hand on his leg as almost to say, stop shaking. He's got one foot up, one foot back. He is holding on to this chair for dear life. He's got a little bit more of a upright, strict stance. His neck does not look relaxed. He looks uncomfortable. He looks a little bit afraid as well. And that was what people saw. So no matter what Nixon said, they actually took that first impression of JFK looking comfortable and confident and Nixon looking uncomfortable and terrified to mean that one of them was a better communicator, a better public speaker, better politician than the other. Because here's the interesting part. Those who listened to the radio, listened to the debate on the radio, thought Nixon won. Based purely on vocals, he actually seemed more credible and a better candidate for president. But once people saw them in the same room, he read as more credible because he was more confident. So we need to figure out as public speakers, how do we use the vocal and non-vocal components of delivery to work together? So let's do a quick activity. I'm going to show you this video. Obviously, it's not a good one, but I want to show you this video, and I want you to pick out all the terms that we just focused on, right? Use of pausing, tone, inflection, pitch, posture, volume, all of those things. I want you to think about them while you're watching this and pick out what he did not do well.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Stark County Republican Party Executive Committee, good evening. And thank you not only for your attendance, but for allowing me the opportunity to speak. My name is Phil Davison, and I am seeking our party's nomination for the position of Stark County Treasurer. In terms of education, I have a bachelor's degree in sociology, a bachelor's degree in history, a master's degree in public administration, and a master's degree in communication. And I will not apologize for my tone tonight. I have been a Republican in times good, and I have been a Republican in times bad.
Okay, now the subtitles were off at the end there. He said, I have been a Republican in times good, and I have been a Republican in times bad. So, what did not work here?
Ladies and gentlemen,
I'm not going to play that again. You can watch it again if you like. But let's analyze this speech. So the first question I have is, what emotion do you think he was trying to elicit in the audience? Think about it. Answer it to yourselves if you like. I think he was trying to get his audience to feel his passion, right? He was wanting his audience to feel empowered, maybe, and passionate with him. But what did we feel instead? I felt a little scared, right? I felt a little bit, well, actually, I felt a lot like who gave him a communications degree, because screaming at your audience did not come off, I think, as what he wanted it to. Instead, it made me feel a little fearful for what was about to happen in the rest of the speech. The next question is, did it actually match the content of the speech, right? So if we go back, the actual content of what he was saying was just, I am seeking this county's nomination for county treasurer. Here are my credentials. I have a master's degree in communication and a master's degree in business administration. I have been a Republican in times good and in times bad. Those were the actual words that were said. Nothing wrong with that, right? But did the tone, the pitch, the inflection, the volume, the facial expressions, the body posture, the gestures, the pacing back and forth, did any of that match what the content was actually saying? I don't think so. No. Lastly, was his use of emotional appeal effective? So remember, emotional appeal was how he used his tone, volume, rate, pausing, and his facial expressions, body posture, gestures, etc., all together to create an emotion. So if his goal at the beginning of this speech was trying to get his audience to feel passionate and prideful and motivated with him, do you think that that goal was achieved? I do not think that this goal was achieved, right? Instead, he came off as not credible. He came off as unstable and definitely not credible enough to hold office in any of our governments, right? Because he seemed irrational and crazy rather than confident, calm, and rational. Now, another example of this is, I'm going to break it down even further. We are going to read the Joaquin Phoenix speech where he accepted the Oscar for Best Actor. So first, I want us to read this together, and I want you to actually get a vision in your mind about what this sounded like. Now, if you've seen this speech, try to forget what it sounded like, and let's take this a step at a time. So let's read this speech. I'm going to let you read it. Well, here's how I want you to do this. Pause this video right now and read it on your own without me reading it. So pause the speech right now. Read it on your own. Okay, now hopefully you unpause the speech and, unpause the video, and you read this on your own, and now we're gonna read it together. Because what I would like you to do is get a vision of what this sounds like in your head before we know what it actually sounded like. So, God, I'm full of so much gratitude right now, and I do not feel elevated above any of my fellow nominees or anyone in this room because we share the same love, the love of film. And this form of expression has given me the most extraordinary life. I don't know what I'd be without it. But I think the greatest gift that it's given me, and many of us in the room, is the opportunity to use our voice for the voiceless. I've been thinking a lot about some of the distressing issues that we're facing collectively. I think at times we feel, or we're made to feel, that we champion different causes. But for me, I see commonality. I think whether we're talking about gender inequality or racism or queer rights or indigenous rights or animal rights, we're talking about the fight against injustice. We're talking about the fight against the belief that one nation, one people, one race, one gender, or one species has the right to dominate, control, and use and exploit another with impunity. So now that you have this vision of what it sounds like in your own head, let's see what it sounded like without seeing what he looked like while giving the speech. And let's see if those two things maybe, or these three things, get disjointed at any point. So let's listen to that same audio.
Hi. Hi. God, I'm full of so much gratitude right now. And I do not feel elevated above any of my fellow nominees or anyone in this room, because we share the same love, the love of film. And this form of expression has given me the most extraordinary life. I don't know what I'd be without it. But I think the greatest gift that it's given me, and many of us in this room, is the opportunity to use our voice for the voiceless. I've been thinking a lot about some of the distressing issues that we are facing collectively. And I think at times we feel, or we're made to feel, that we champion different causes. But for me, I see commonality. I think whether we're talking about gender inequality or racism or queer rights or indigenous rights or animal rights, we're talking about the fight against injustice. We're talking about the fight against the belief that one nation, one people, one race, one gender, or one species has the right to dominate, control, and use and exploit another with impunity.
Okay, so now we heard how he delivered it vocally, right? We heard all the emotion in his voice, and I want you to think for a second, how did that differ from what you had in your head? Truly, how did it differ than what you had in your head, right? Did you use inflection in different points? Did you pause at different points than he did? Did he use more emotion than you thought, or less? Did he have a different tone than you expected him to have? You know, he definitely had a very certain emotion going on, right? He sounded very, very serious, but very sad, even very affected, right? He was breathing really heavily. And so we were able to really hear that there was some emotion going on behind this speech. So now that we have the text, how we thought it would sound in our own heads, how it actually sounded, let's see if when we match what it sounded like with what it looked like, if we get a different read, right? To me, when I heard this, I thought, wow, what a beautiful speech. Really just so heartfelt, and he's obviously feeling very emotional about it. And just, wow, how beautiful. Now let's see if that stands when we see what he looks like giving it, or if we get another read. Pay attention to his body gestures.
God, I'm full of so much gratitude right now. And I do not feel elevated above any of my fellow nominees or anyone in this room, because of the love of film. And this form of expression has out some of the distressing issues that we are facing collectively. And I think at times we feel, or we're made to feel, that we champion different causes. But for me, I see commonality. I think whether we're talking about gender inequality or racism or queer rights or indigenous rights or animal rights, we're talking about the fight against injustice. We're talking about the fight against the belief that one nation, one people, one race, one gender, or one species has the right to dominate, control, and use and exploit another with impunity.
Okay. So again, I'm going to ask, how did the audio clip and the video clip compare to one another? Are you getting a different message this time? Now, for me, when I heard it again, I thought, what a beautiful speech, filled with emotion. When I watched it and saw his facial expressions, you know, the gestures that he was using, you know, how he would tilt his head and he would kind of, you know, breathe really heavily and kind of walk a little bit, shifting his weight. When people would clap, he'd say, no, don't do that, don't do that. Put his head down and move his hands really fast. It read very differently to me. Instead, now I'm kind of thinking, is he okay? Now he's not coming off as credible as I initially thought based on the tonal quality of his voice. But now paired with this kind of erratic and a little uncontrolled, almost like a twitch, these kind of movements, the crazy eyes at certain points, that made me read this speech very differently. And now the credibility is in question. Now, maybe it read differently for you, right? Maybe you actually read this as more powerful or more enticing, and that's great. But this is the point of public speaking, right? We are all different people coming to witness one event called the speech. And when we witness that event, we might read them differently. And so what you have to do as a public speaker is think about, how can you deliver a speech in a particular way that you intend to? How can I get them to feel this emotion? How do I get them to feel this emotion by me feeling this emotion? So how do I feel it, right? How do I show it in my face, in my body, in my tone, in my volume? That's what this whole conversation is about, is in your next speech, what is the crucial message? What are the main emotions you want us to feel, and how are you gonna get us to feel that? And you wanna make sure that the tone of your voice matches up with your visual non-vocal. So you want the vocal and the non-vocal parts of delivery to match, to create the most effective and emotional speech you can. So that's all I have for you today. Please think about what you want to do in your next speeches to make them powerful and amazing. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.